There are a lot of opinions about what Disney should or should not be doing with regard to their preparedness for reopening the parks in the United States. From the park should stay closed until we're 100% ready to open it right now. And by the way, I'm also not going to wear a mask. Now, I like to guess. Speculation is something that we're fond of doing here on this channel, so I thought it would be a fun exercise to try to speculate on a point of view from someone whose opinion would be definitely valued, an opinion that would be trusted, and we wouldn't second guess for sure. And that question that I have is, what would Walt do? You know, it's interesting, when Walt passed in '65, the company, the Disney company, was kind of rudderless because he was such, you know, an important figure in decision making. I mean, he was the only figure really in decision making. So how does a company go on, you know, making decisions after that? And that's where this phrase comes from. That was the mantra in the Disney executive offices, is what would Walt do? And it took a long time for them to get over that. I think it was when they brought in Eisner in 1984, they brought in Michael Eisner to run the company after having successfully, I guess, removed Ron Miller, who was Disney's son-in-law, his daughter's husband. That was one of the first things that Eisner did, was to sort of get rid of that "what would Walt do" philosophy. Now, I think at the time it was probably a good idea, because you have to sort of rip off that Band-Aid and start making decisions anew. But then the company was a tremendous success initially when Eisner brought in. I don't want to get into that debate, but I'm just trying to kind of give you the genesis of where that phrase comes from, what would Walt do, because it did have a home in the Disney company. So to get started, I think it would be best to start this conversation by trying to understand what we think we know about Walt as a person. We know, for example, that Walt was pro-business. He didn't suffer people telling him how to run his company, not by the government, not by anyone. And I would say that in my own research of his story, one way to describe Walt, in my opinion, would be that he knew what he wanted, and he had a definite idea, a definite vision, and he expected everybody else to just fall in line with him. Not that he was, he wanted yes men around him, but once he made his decision, then it was a go. And, he knew what was best for Disney. He took other people's thoughts and opinions, processed them, and then made up his mind. And then you fall in line. We know him also to be someone who had an attention to detail, especially those things that would normally be missed. He loved to be able to give that little extra to guests. And they wouldn't necessarily know it up front, but they would feel it as an overall aesthetic in terms of what was happening at Disneyland. We know him to be a believer in family, safety first. Cleanliness was very important to him. Matter of fact, cleanliness was something that Disneyland was built on. It was one of the founding tenets of the park. He made it a point of telling everybody that Disneyland was going to be different from amusement parks on that very subject. That actually reminds me of a story that I've read quite a few times, and when Walt talks about the history of Disneyland, in an interview, and hopefully I get this right, I don't butcher this because I'm going off memory, but in one of those interviews, he was retelling a conversation that he had with Lillian about his desire to build Disneyland. Lillian objected. She said, why on earth would you want to do this? Why would you want to build an amusement park? It doesn't seem to fit with his aesthetic at all. And Lillian often did that. She was the sounding board for Walt in terms of, I don't like this or I like that, kind of like an everyman's position. And if he could appease Lillian, I think he thought he could appease, the masses. That's just an assumption on my part. But anyway, Walt had made the point of telling her that Disneyland would be different. The very foundation of Disneyland is built around the idea that it's not going to be like a Coney Island or a Santa Cruz or a traditional stereotypical amusement park, which is now the distinction between amusement park and theme parks. Disneyland, the first of its kind, would be clean, would be well run, professional, and it would be suitable for families. With that in mind, I asked in our last FBD 1955 video for you to tell me what you thought Walt would do in this circumstance. We'll start with Living Spirit, and he or she, I'm not sure, said that Walt would care more about health and safety of the guests and children. I'm assuming then that you would believe that he wouldn't open the park until it was ready with health and safety. Or I'm not sure if that means from the government or from their own preparedness. I'm not sure. But I can't argue with that. He did believe in health and safety. Oh, we've got Rapunzel 1701 who asked back, what would Walt do? Nothing. Now, I think what Rapunzel is saying is that he wouldn't have closed the park at all. Like, he just would have kept going because nothing, Disneyland had never been closed before, except for, I think, a single day for 9/11. That's a curious position. I'm not sure that Walt could have taken that position, considering it was government mandated. He may not have had a choice. Cesar Perez says that Walt would wait, probably until July or August, to see what happens, and that he wouldn't put cast members and families in danger. Now, what happens, I'm assuming he means with both the virus and to see how other amusement parks are addressing the situation. Again, that's my assumption. But I agree, he's not going to put families in danger or cast members. And then John Rodriguez says Walt would close till it's safe. There's another one of those. To which Dane DeBella said no, he wouldn't. Which I thought was right there. That pretty much summarizes, that embodies the very wide spectrum of positions that people are taking on this. And somewhere there's a truth in one of those, right? It's either he would have opened it or he wouldn't have opened it. One of those has to be true, right? It's so strange. Every time I have one of these discussions, or every time I think, I start to meditate on these topics, I'm always struck by how different we all are and how differently we all process stuff. Neither right nor wrong necessarily, just that we are so different. And that's where, I try to practice patience and trying to understand everybody's point of view. But I digress. Mark O'Neill says that Walt would do everything he could to shoulder the responsibilities by the company and cast so there is very little impact on guests. He would make it seamless for guests. And when I first began processing this question to myself, that's kind of the position that I took, that my first instinct was that Walt would keep going, that he would have gone above and beyond the minimum, spared no expense. I have no doubt of that. Extra hand sanitizers, extra clean workstations, extra cast members, extra anything as it was needed. Now, this is not to say that Walt spent frivolously. I mean, Roy did have to rein him in quite a bit from time to time, but he wasn't, he didn't want a healthy bottom line. So profit was a concern, but he also believed in spending the money that he earned in order to make his product better. And this, I think this would apply in this situation too, with responding to a virus like this. But the Disney company's history is full of instances where Walt earned and then spent it all. Not to say that he would do that in this case, but I'm just saying he didn't spare any expense. He would have done all of that, and then he would have opened as soon as he was satisfied, as soon as he felt like he had conquered the concept of guest safety and made it possible for guests to enjoy the park as intended. And by the way, that was something that Walt, I believe, was always very good at, blending the concepts of business, of commerce, with guest satisfaction, with cleanliness, with safety, with family. He was able to do both. He was able to, take those measures and still have a successful operation. If anybody could have done it, Walt could have done it. For example, take the construction of Disneyland in general, in terms of Walt's pursuit of what he wanted. He he built Disneyland in a year. Imagine that in today's environment. I don't know how hard it was to build something. Now, by the way, I should say he almost built Disneyland in a year because obviously there was a lot of things missing. It was incomplete. But they were able to open the gates within a year. But I digress. I don't know how difficult it was to build something of that scale back in 1955, if a year was a long time or not. Today, obviously that is not the case. You got to go through so many stages of approvals and developments and concepts and this and that before you can put a shovel in the ground. But having said that, once they did put that shovel in the ground, a year. Take for example, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. That took 3 years just to build those 14 acres. They did 70 acres almost. No, almost that in a year. So a lot of that has to do with. I'm going to go ahead and go on a limb and say that a lot of that has to do with Walt's determination and his aggressiveness in being able to do that. And I think that goes towards the idea that if he decided that he wanted to have Disneyland up and ready for a response to this virus, that he could have done it, or he would have done it. I think anyway. It's interesting as I think about the idea relating the two ideas. What would Walt do, and the concept of expenses and where how much do you throw at, how much money do you throw at a situation. I don't know if I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I kind of wish in this day and age of the Disney company that they did at least a little bit go back to a what would Walt do, at least entertain that idea. Maybe have a guy in the room who's the what would Walt do guy. And you don't necessarily have to, I don't know, who am I thinking of? The guy in Lucasfilm who's in charge of making sure that the canon is always being considered, or that that it's a proper Star Wars thing to do. We need a guy like that who represents the Walt Disney state of mind. I guess, I don't know, it's probably fantasy, blue sky, whatever, but it just seems like today I think that Disney doesn't necessarily believe in putting all that money back into the business. I do wish, especially in a case like this, in a situation like this where it's required, their first instinct is to try to save money, to spend less, because you're not earning money, because the parks have been closed, because there's going to be fewer people there, that you want to spend less. But in reality, I feel like this is one of those cases where it may be better to actually overspend and take the hit in order to remind people of what the Disney experience is, what it's supposed to be. The Disneyland experience is not, to be watered down, in my opinion. He knew what he wanted. He pursued it doggedly. I mean, he even has that quote about pursuing things doggedly. He was confident. He was aggressive. He made things happen. But then I read this from Ash. Ash said, Walt would have waited until everything was back to normal. Limited attendance, forcing kids to wear masks, no meet and greets or parades or fireworks. That's just a cheap imitation of Disneyland. Now, there's a lot of truth in that statement. One of the things that Walt was fond of doing was describing things as being either good show or bad show. And those what Ash just described, I believe most definitely Walt would have considered bad show. He would not have wanted anything to get in the way of guests being able to enjoy the park, enjoy what the park had to offer, and enjoy it in a way that Walt wanted you to enjoy it. Just think about the way that they set up the park to begin with the berm and the single entrance and the tunnels, the omnimover. All of these, all of these things that I'm talking about are means of controlling, directing how guests consume Disneyland. Having multiple entrances creates, variables. The berm shuts out outside influence. The omnimover positions guests in a way that they want you to be positioned so that you're not distracted by anything else and you're seeing the show as intended. So I gotta think that Walt would have thought that wearing a mask is not the way he wanted you to enjoy Disneyland. Being told where to stand is not something that he would have enjoyed making people do. He didn't want anybody to leave Disneyland with a bad experience. And no doubt that would have been a bad experience for some guests. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing these things. that Disneyland today shouldn't be limiting attendance, that they shouldn't have social distancing or wearing a mask, because these things are all necessary in order for us to see Disneyland today. That is just a circumstance that we all have to get used to. I'm just saying there are going to be guests who go to the park who are going to leave less than satisfied because of this. Again, I understand these things are all necessary in order for the park to open, and I personally am totally okay with this. I will go to Disneyland right now with a mask on, standing 6 feet away, and not seeing a parade or a fireworks show, because, that I'm okay with that personally. But, it is what it is. It's not Disney's fault. That's just the circumstance that we're in today. So, considering those two perspectives, I think if I had to decide, if I had to pick which, direction Walt would have gone in his day if he was encountered with the same situation that we're experiencing today, I have to think that Walt might have just decided to keep the park closed until he was satisfied that he could protect everybody, keep the park clean, keep the park safe, and put on a good show for the people who are going to have to suffer through all of those, situations. I think he wanted to have all three of those things, because above all, Walt wanted to provide a good show for you guys. Not just open the doors and, have a reasonable experience that you can enjoy. Some might like it, some may not. That was never his goal, I don't think. I mean, far be it for me to speak for the man, but just, I've read a lot about him, so I feel like I can, kind of speak with some sort of confidence on this. But he wanted everybody to walk away having had, a memorable experience, and in the best way possible. Not a memorable experience because you didn't get to see the fireworks. Imagine, look how upset we get today when it's a little too windy out and we can't watch the fireworks. People get really upset. They look forward to that. But I guess if you were told, oh boy, see, here I go. Right now I'm riffing. If you were told up front there's no fireworks, then you don't have the expectation, so maybe it's not so bad. It's a tough one. Now, of course, having said that, this is all predicated on the fact that there is a finish line to this situation, that there is an all clear, or at least reasonably all clear move where people can say, you know what, okay, the worst is behind us. You don't have to wear a mask anymore. Wash your hands and be considerate. It's basically all they're going to tell us to do. If that is a reality in our short-term future. Now, if this situation is long-term, if this is something that if this is like a new normal, and going forward it's some sort of dystopian thing where everybody wears masks all the time, and it just becomes part of our lives, then that changes for Disneyland too. And that actually changed a lot in the way that we consume entertainment, because what qualifies as entertainment will change. Look what's happening in the world of digital, entertainment right now, where people can't go to the movies, so we're getting stuff digitally. I wonder if that's, I'm riffing again. I wonder if we're seeing a sea change on how we consume new media. All right, so that's all we have on that subject for today. Let us know more of your thoughts on that in the comments below. And while you're at it, answer me this question for our next FBD 1955 video. I want you to name me 5 attractions, 5 rides that you believe best define Disneyland as an experience. Not necessarily your 5 favorite rides. Just imagine you were trying to describe Disneyland to somebody who had never been before. And you're saying, they're like, why is Disneyland so great? What is it about Disneyland that is different? Or how does Disneyland make you feel? Or I don't know, if you're just trying to say, hey, look, there's this place called Disneyland. It's pretty amazing. You can do these 5 things. And what are those 5 things that would be your selling points? 5 rides, by the way, attractions. I guess you could put shows in there too if you want. But 5 things that define Disneyland for you. Let us know in the comments below. And until then, thank you very much, guys, for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And while you're at it, hit the notification bell, because that'll let you know when new videos come up. And then, as always, please remember to be kind to one another. Try to practice a little patience, a little understanding, a little empathy in your life today. Try to see something from somebody else's point of view for just a minute. and fresh baked.